Okay.
Yeah, that's probably better. All right. So in my brief opening remarks, let me just first of all thank the members for their understanding and patience based on the fact that at our last meeting when we were going on recess, I'd indicated that based on the changes that are taking place in the government's policy and of course the international market, it was incumbent on me as chairman to basically do a quick review to make sure that we were moving apace with what was happening and making policy recommendations based on that. I know that it was not all supported, and remember Paul himself wasn't very happy, but again, I want to thank you. And as I committed then, we have tried to get back on track in the shortest possible time. And I think that we are there, which is why the presentation is going to be so important today to continue the discussions. So by way of background and just brief remarks leading up to the presentation, which I've seen the presentation and gone through it, and I think it's quite comprehensive. It is very clear, members, that the electricity grid is a strategic asset to Jamaica that contributes to the benefit of each and every Jamaican, and indeed all persons and residents in Jamaica. Globally in 2022, crude oil rose by nearly 65%, and natural gas over 30%. Even coal prices went up nearly 400% in 2022. In Europe, electricity prices increased fourfold, and natural gas prices surged to US $30 plus MMBTU, the energy equivalent of paying $180 for a barrel of oil, up from $16 MMBTU in 2021. Jamaica is like much of the rest of the world, has found itself in the midst of a perfect energy storm where electricity sector decisions made today will have long-term and far-reaching consequences. Hence, again, the justification for the position that I took back in July. My ministry understands very well and clear that only pragmatic policy choices and evidence-based decisions would be suitable to ensure secure and affordable energy for today, tomorrow, and the foreseeable future. To this end, the ministry's review of the current Electricity Act 2015 identified several inconsistencies within the Act. One such inconsistency is that the Act does not allow for the replacement of existing generation capacity with renewables. Therefore, this had to be changed if we were to achieve 50% renewables by 2050, as the law only allowed like-for-like replacement under the right of first refusal. This came to the fore, members, with the replacement of JPS for the 171 megawatts in I think it's Hunts Bay. Yeah. And basically they raised that issue at that time, and thankfully it flagged it to us. And of course, as I said before, that was an inconsistency that went counter to what we are trying to achieve. Thankfully, I think that has been brought to cabinet and has been agreed on, that it can be renewables can be used to get back to the full 171. All right. So in relation to unbundling, again, the ministry research has showed that the size of the demand on the grid is critical in determining whether unbundling is appropriate. We also found no country with less than 3,000 megawatts peak demand had established a successful and functional unbundled market. For context, our latest forecast shows that by 2030, Jamaica's peak demand will be just under 800 megawatts. Work done by the World Bank showed that for a country to have a competitive power market, that is an unbundled power market, it would need a system size of at least 3 gigawatts or 3,000 megawatts of peak demand, a power market trading value of over $1 billion in order to justify investments in the needed energy trading platform, and have at least 20 terawatt hours of annual sales. Jamaica, by comparison, has 3 terawatt hours of sales per annum. We found that unbundling would involve unquantified and, by extension, financial costs related to the termination of JPS's current license and the restructuring of the electricity legal and regulatory framework in order to accommodate an unbundled system. Finally, if Jamaica forces unbundling, then the restructuring costs that will be borne by the JPS would either be recovered from the government of Jamaica or the remaining customers on the grid. In relation to the right of first refusal that is embedded within the electricity license granted to the current investor JPS, it is not optional. It's a right that they were given. Removal of this right will be seen as a material change to their license. This would involve unknown legal and financial implications that would likely have to be borne by Jamaicans, either as taxes or by electricity rate adjustments. The license comes to a natural end in 4 years' time. During that time, they should use renewables to replace any retiring fossil fuel generation plants. This would help to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And as it relates to the IRP, the second draft, in 2020, the Integrated Resource Plan, already approved by Cabinet, was based on assumptions of demand which have not materialized and have since subsequently been impacted by the global pandemic, plus the Russia-Ukraine war. The IRP was also premised on 30% renewables by 2030, which has subsequently been superseded by a more aggressive target of 50%. This more ambitious target was driven by the glaring need for Jamaica to clean itself of imported energy, thus making itself less vulnerable to external energy shocks and to eventually chart the way to our energy independence. This ultimately would make Jamaica's fragile economic recovery less vulnerable to wild fluctuations in the global energy market. The updated IRP is currently going through stakeholder consultations before being finalized and taken to Cabinet. That would be the second draft. So, members, with or without JPS, Jamaica's small electricity market cannot sustain unbundling. The ministry will set up systems to hold itself accountable and to give a work plan with timelines and regular updates to the citizenry in order to demonstrate its progress as we chart the way forward. As I said, members, Mr. Brian Richardson has an extensive presentation to make, which I would ask you to allow him to make, and then, of course, we will have robust discussions in relation to what has been outlined. I think once you get the presentation, you will be in a better position to understand why these decisions have been made, and of course, the detailed information in relation to the research that has been done and the work that has been done by the ministry. So I'm going to ask Mr. Richardson to present, and then, of course, we will have a discussion on this matter. Mr. Richardson, over to you.
Chairman, before you move
the revised matrix is being emailed out now as we speak. So please check your emails.
Yeah, but before you move on, you've made some mention of some things, so I just like to
sure. As the opposition spokesperson, I will yield to you, sir.
And as you know, I have been anticipating this resumption, which meeting has been in abeyance since July. And in fact, Minister, if we go back into our records, we really had our last substantive meeting in February 2022. But Minister, I just want to remind this committee that the work that we have to do is urgent work, especially because there is a law that mandates a review of the 2015 law that was passed. And this review should have happened in 2020. So we are approaching 3 years out of that absolutely necessary work. And you and I will disagree on this point. The break was taken to review the emerging situation with the war and so on. But Minister, we have had energy crisis so often in our lives as a country. And I still do not believe, and I'm going to await also presentation that you have referred to. But one thing that you said that jumped out at me, which is quite important, and that is the change in policy in relation to the right of first refusal that JPSCO has. And it jumps out at me because last week you announced to the country that the government was about to embark on 200 megawatts of renewable energy that is going to be available by way of free competition. It's going to be procured freely by international competition. I just want to be clear that that position remains and that this recent cabinet decision does not in any way affect that 200 megawatts of capacity that you announced last week.
Absolutely, 100%, member. As a matter of fact, it is a cause of great concern to me in relation to the delay that has taken place, which is beyond, obviously, the ministry's control and more because of the processes that the GP has had to go through. I have an update because I figured that it would come up today, and we are still on track for April, mid to end of April. We are about to get the draft cabinet submission. We're at that point, we will need Ministry of Finance and the AG's comments. And I'm expecting that to be received in the next few days. And I've already flagged it to both the AG's department and of course, Ministry of Finance for a expeditious response to be able to meet the deadline.
Yeah, but in that regard, Minister, you mentioned a 190 for JPS, having been also resolved. What is that 190? What technology? And is it a part, is it going to be 200 plus 190? I'm not hearing it.
Sorry, member, 171 replacement.
Yes, so it's 171.
That's separate. That's separate from the 200.
Right. So we're looking at 370.
Well, with the 171 for the JPS, which right. as I said before these changes, it was like for like, which means that it would have been fossil fuel rather than renewables, which we are trying. So we are waiting now to hear from them because we had to give them that okay in relation to the change.
Right. So,
and of course, amendments will be required, which we are proceeding with now as well.
Just to be absolutely clear then, so we are talking about 371 megawatts of renewable energy. We're not hearing him.
That's correct, member. That's correct.
Very well.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So we're going to ask Sir Richardson now to make the presentation. And then, of course, that will give us the full picture for discussion.
Morning, members. Let me share my screen. Morning again, members. So I have been given the insurmountable task of outlining to the members of the JSC and Jamaica at large the electricity situation here in Jamaica. And so I thought our best way to start off the conversation is just to give an overview, of back to basics of what the electricity grid is, and try and do so in the easiest way I could think of to help to explain to everyone the situation we're in, what the ministry saw, what the minister and the PS are aware of, and what we're trying to resolve within the MSET. So if you imagine a bathtub with faucets at the top, and you should be able to see my little red pointer there. You have these faucets at the top, and they're putting water into the bathtub here. And then at the bottom, you have the drains. And that drain is the demand that's taken on the grid. And what any grid has to do is to balance the incoming supply. So we have HF4 diesel plants, LNG fired plants, hydro dams, solar, wind, and DER is distributed energy resources. So those would be solar panels on roofs, et cetera, et cetera. So that comes into the bathtub, and you have person in the residential space, commercial space, industrial space, the bauxite space. And we have, unfortunately, in Jamaica, theft as well, and that drains from the tub. And what the utility has to do is to keep storage within that bathtub, and that depth of that storage is what gives us the 50 hertz. So that's the heartbeat of the grid, 50 hertz. So it does that every minute, 50 times per minute. And that's why when you buy your bits of equipment, it says 50 or 60 hertz. And if you buy a 50 hertz, it's going to heat up a little bit, a 60 hertz, sorry, it's going to heat up a little bit more during the course of you using it than say a 50 hertz, because it's using energy inefficiently. And so the electricity grid provider has to balance all of that input, the variability of solar and wind, the backbone of diesel, HFO, LNG, and hydro that sits in the back as well. They have to make sure this depth always stays at a reasonable number, that it doesn't get out of whack. And if it does get out of whack, what ultimately happens is, one, the machines, which are basically these spinning machines, they get unstable, they start to wobble, and they break. And they break catastrophically, not just stop like your car, they explode. And so every grid has to ensure that once they get some instability, they have to be able to shut down those plants, which could go into catastrophic failure. And so those go through a bit of a cascading back breakdown or shutdown to save the grid, so everyone can have energy the next day. Otherwise, if they do break, you're talking months, sometimes even years, before they can bring the grid back on. And so we have that balance that's taking place every day. We know wind and solar blows or the shines sometime. It certainly doesn't do that at night. And so that has to be balanced by the grid operator. Now, what we have in Jamaica is that we have an installed capacity of about 150 megawatts currently. The pie graph that you see there gives you the distribution across the IPPs, which is 67%, and JPS, which is the
Sorry, you said 150?
No, it's 141 total installed generation capacity.
Of how much? You said megawatts?
Yeah, megawatts.
How much? Let's repeat that for me.
1,000.
1,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
1,041.
Yes. It did say 150. So I want to make sure.
Yeah. So it's just under 150. Right. And with regards to that installed capacity, I was saying that the IPPs provide about 67%, and the utility, which is run JPS, provides about 33%. Now, our highest peak across Jamaica, so that's the demand on this side here, was 67 megawatts back in 2017. Our 2021 peak demand.
No, you said 67, but you meant 667.
667 megawatts. Thank you very much, member. 667 megawatts in 2017. And in 2021, the peak demand had declined to 632 megawatts. So it's about 5% less than our 2017 high. And so our installed generation capacity is over 60% of our peak demand. So we have a situation where we are providing electricity for demand that isn't there. But that's the situation that we have. That's the hand that we have been dealt. And so we're looking at the options to see how best we can move forward. Now, the majority of that generation lies in the fossil fuel side. What we certainly want to do as we go into the future as the MSET is to get us to a point where we move that to 50% renewables by 2030. And that has to be done in an aggressive way to get to that point by 2030. That's 7 years away, and every day it goes, it's ticking down. And what I wanted to put on this slide is just to give the members an overview of what the prices are within the world for island states. It's a very different dynamic for environments where you have a continent, so to speak, or a very large market. They can share their electricity grid across countries. So they have transmission lines that go, say, from Canada into America, from Germany into Hungary. It just interconnects, and so they can provide demand up to a particular provide supply up to a particular percentage. And if they have a hot day, so to speak, they then go out and get that power from another provider who may not have the same kind of conditions. Islands don't have that benefit. They have to ensure that everything within the island shore is provided for by the utility. And they have to also include any excess that could happen. So if they have a very hot day and everyone is turning on their ACs at the same time, they have to make sure that the demand is able to meet that, because they can't just throw a connection across the way over the sea and get somebody's electricity on an island that doesn't have that demand. That just doesn't pan out. And what happens with islands ultimately is, because we need to have the energy there, we need to get an energy dense product coming into the island. That's usually in the form of HFO or LNG, which is a little bit less energy dense. But those are the kind of things that has the storage in themselves, the inherent capacity to be able to power the demand that an island needs. And so in the top left, you'll see across the Pacific Islands in 2017, you're going about 20 cents per kilowatt hour, going up to about 80 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's US dollars. And Jamaica's band is the red band here. So we're just about in the middle. I have Fiji here at 20 cents per kilowatt hour. And I want to just say to the members that today, Fiji is about 30 cents per kilowatt hour. This one is Australia, and Australia is a very, very large island. But the range for islands in the Pacific goes between 20 cents per kilowatt hour to 80 cents per kilowatt hour. On the right, you'll see tariffs within the Caribbean. This is a 2012 study, but the very same thing you'll see. Antigua has 40 cents, Trinidad has 6 cents, Suriname has 5 cents. Trinidad has a unique situation. They don't have to import their energy. They have it on site, and they also subsidize their electricity. Suriname, the very same thing. They have their energy on site, meaning they produce. They don't have to import, and they have the benefit of being interconnected, so they can connect to the other islands, not islands, the other countries close to them as well, and they also subsidize. So they are a bit of a misnomers, but the others you'll see, Jamaica is here in the red. It's about 36. We're on average the same across all the islands.
And then just another correction here, because remember last week I asked the minister the question, and he said that we go up to 42 cents per kilowatt hour. So is this a correction of what the minister said, or?
It's no correction. This is an average, so it's going to change. We have a couple of rates across the island. I think if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 5. Don't hold me to that, but it's on the JPS's website and OER's website, and those rates have different tiers. And so the range is to cover that.
So who would pay 42 cents though? Just sort of.
I'm not sure. It's an average, sir.
Yeah.
So if I could continue with regards to the graph on the lower.
One second. Sorry, just a clarification on that question. Because I was a bit struck by the 36 that is there relative to what the minister said on Standing Finance Committee. I understand from the committee meeting that the average, which I think you concur with now, is 42. What is the 36? Is it the average? But what is it? What is 36?
The 36 is, as you see on the graph here, for 2012. But here it's still an average.
No, hold on. It's an average for 2012, right? 10 years ago, right? What is the average in 2023 or 2020?
Because we must have prices for now.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll do this. Let me get the prices and I'll come back to the committee measurements. That's the easiest way.
Because this is barely just an historic data.
Right. So we'll get the current prices and come back to the committee. So we'll give you the rate 20 as JPS has it, all the rate pairs, and give you the average. So you can have.
So can we agree then that this set of data you provided, 2012, would only be for historic reference, but not in terms of what obtains now?
We can agree from the point of view, I'm just trying to show what island prices are, that they're in the ballpark of between 20 to 80 cents across the globe.
But Mr. Richard, Mr. Richard.
No, it's current. It's current as well.
But that's what I was.
I just don't have the.
On the chart it says average tariff 2012.
2012.
And it would apply then for all the countries listed on the chart.
It would.
That's why I made the comment that it could only be valid for the purpose of historic comparison, but not in relation to what obtains now. That's over 10 years ago. So I'm just questioning in my mind, what is the relevance of these set of numbers that you're going through here for the current discussion, if it is only for historic reference, or how it forms into the propositions going forward from here?
So the easiest way to answer this is to give a context to everyone of what island territories pay for the electricity.
10 years ago.
10 years ago, 2017 and 2018, based on the data I could get. If you want an average of 2022, that's going to take some additional work for us to be able to find all these islands and provide it in the very same table.
Mr. Richardson, you're confusing me. Tell you quite frankly, you're confusing me. You have shown us a chart here that gives a rate to a particular period, 2012. Then I hear you mention about 2017, right? That would be another set of data, right? So in my mind, if you give me data for 2012, that's what it is in 2012. If there's another set of data for 2017, then we'll look at those, but those are not on the table now. We are referring to now. I would believe that at the very least, you'd have data for 2022 for the purpose of this discussion as to where we are relative to where we wish or seeking to go. So I'm at a loss for the relevance of this chart that you're going through, if it is not only for comparative purposes, but not for the current.
But on a further point of order, I can provide current prices for all of these countries, 2022 prices. So, Mr. Richardson, I would quite happy to share those with you.
So, member, certainly we would receive that, but just to say we are agreed. These are historic prices, but the context is just to give a overview of what islands pay for electricity. The ministry will look at the current 2022 prices and look to develop that graph. I can't provide a time frame around that just yet, but we will certainly look at that. May I continue, members?
Sure.
Thank you. On the bottom left, you'll see average prices in the United States, which we have all heard about, going from 10 cents up to about 32 cents. And if you look at this, everything on where you can see the highlighter, these are all the states, and they have big economies. But on the end, you see Hawaii, which is the only island within the United States, and we're at 32 cents per kilowatt hour. And that comparison is just to show that islands, no matter what environment they're in, they usually have an electricity price that ranges between 20 or 25 cents going up to even 80 cents. That is just because of the fundamentals of what an island has to deal with, which I spoke about earlier, that we have to have the generation capacity on site, have the fuel on site if we have peak demand, which we have never planned for before, and we are able to provide it at that time.
Again, just to note that these are prices for 2018, right?
Yes, prices for 2018, but they're not off right now. If I look back at it, in Hawaii, the price in 2023 is 31 cents to 44 cents per kilowatt hour. In America Samoa, 2022, it's 44 cents per kilowatt hour to 48 cents per kilowatt hour.
Yeah. What about Jamaica, though? Do you have those comparisons? Because
I'll get those to you. I'll get those to you, sir. I'm not sure why I'm not able to continue my presentation. Okay. This slide is just to show a quick snapshot of the JPS's, based on the JPS's annual report. Top left is the peak demand over the last 5 years. We'll see a clear decline going from the 667 I spoke about to 632 over 5 years. The bottom left is the fuel price and the losses on the system, which I spoke about in the first slide. That has been trending upwards over the last 5 years. Consequently, revenue has been increasing over the last 5 years. On the bottom, you'll see the defection from the grid over the last 5 years as well, 6 years ultimately. And the reason why I'm raising this here is to point out that everything within this bathtub has to be paid for by the residents, the commercial, the industrial. That rate is based on everything added up, basically, and this is a simplification, and basically divided by all of those paying customers. And so all that value, all of that has to be come down to a unit rate, basically by dividing ultimately the amount of residents, the amount of commercial customers across the cost of the grid. And that's how you get the per kilowatt rates. And that cost is very dependent on how much install capacity you have, how much storage you probably keep on site, and theft certainly, that demand has no payment associated with it. So it shifts to the ones that are on the grid and paying for that theft as well. This slide is just to show the electricity prices. Just give me a sec. The electricity prices across the globe over the last 2 years. So we start in 2021, April, and we go out to August 2022. And you see that in a state just like Germany, they have seen 118% increase in their power costs since 2021. Japan has seen a 24% increase. India has seen a 70% increase. The US about an 80% increase, and Brazil, a special case, they've seen a fall of about 72%. And that's largely because they have quite a bit of energy that they can provide on site. And they also have quite a bit of biofuels that they can provide on site. And so they can manage their costs a little bit better, particularly if they're inclined to do so. And they did. And that's why you have the change there. And so I'm showing this to just outline to the members that across the world, there was a spike in the price of power for almost everyone, simply because of the war and simply because of the issues that people have been realizing. And you're looking here at Germany, who used to have a power price of about 8 cents per kilowatt hour, going up to 60 cents per kilowatt hour in under a year. There's no country that can take that kind of change, that rapid change, and it has caused pressures within Germany, and some of that I'll speak to shortly, and it's caused pressures here in Jamaica, as we're all aware. So with regards to the electricity market structures, this slide is to give an overview of what we have as the single buyer model or the bundled model. So that's Jamaica's current state. You have the independent, or the IPPs, the independent power providers, which we are aware of, and we have the public generation company, which is a JPS, and then you have the transmission lines, the substations, the distribution companies we don't have. It's all within JPS, and then you have the consumers and the large industrial buyers. Now we have a situation here where I should say, most of our large industrial buyers, which help to pay for the entire grid for everyone, they're contemplating taking that demand off the grid. So if we go back to the bathtub for Jamaica was designed with that demand in mind, meaning that was planned for. We're in a state now where this demand is being taken off the grid. So we planned for that demand, we built that infrastructure, but individuals are taking themselves off the grid. So they're saying, no, we will provide our own utility in a box, but we will stay connected to the JPS grid. People are seeing that being done, and so we have customers, smaller customers doing the very same thing. They're looking for that utility in a box solution, taking that demand off the grid. And if you remember that bathtub, that cost has to then be reallocated. So if your large demand comes off your grid, you have to recalculate that price, that cap, that fixed cost across the remaining or connected customers. And so there's only one way the price can go if you have those fixed costs, because you can't just use an erase and take a power plant off the grid. They have a long-term PPA. And so the price trend is upwards. So ultimately, that's one of the reasons why we're having that constant increase in the end user rates in Jamaica. We have a significant overcapacity. I said 60% of our demand, and a lot of that is fossil fuel. On top of that, we have 20% losses, which we spoke about, and that's increasing as well, because as it becomes difficult for individuals to be able to pay their bills, their contemplation moves to, unfortunately, a position where they're taking that that demand. Well, they're not paying for their demand, but they're keeping their demand on the grid, but taking it as an informal use, as someone had outlined. And so that provides or puts Jamaica in a very precarious position going forward. Now, this slide shows what the contemplated position or desired end state of having an unbundled system or a wholesale buyer system or a deregulated system. So you see, you have independent power providers, you have private power companies, and you have a public company as well. And this would be hived off as a separate part of the grid. they would have to get their own profit. Everything would have to, their investors who are investing in this side of the grid, they would have to look at how they're going to get their money back from the investments they've made. Then you have the separate transmission and operate, a TSO, transmission operator. They move that energy from these providers, which may be sited at some point away, all the way into say, Kingston, for instance. And they will have their own profit motives as well, and their own company structure. Then after that, there is the wholesale power market, and that is where all that power that's coming in to be sold to the off-takers. This is the how do you say it? The exchange. This is where that that kind of like the stock exchange, where it's an electricity exchange, and that power market requires about 1 billion in sales or more per annum for it to be worthwhile, as was mentioned by the minister. And so that wholesale power market company has their own profit motives as well, and they will seek to ensure that profits are locked in for their investors. Then you're going to have the distribution side of it. So these private distribution companies, which then take that power from the wholesale market and take it down to the private consumers. And you may also have industrial customers as well, or the large buyers. And that model is what I understand was being discussed or required within the JC that I've been a part of. And that's what started this quest at ministry, because of the instruction of the permanent secretary, that we need to look at what options are out there based on our island state and demands that we're being asked to put into our legislation. And so that review was done. It took quite some time, but it gave us the information that showed that, well, I'll just wait until I get onto the other slide. So the quick takeaway from the slide is, are we choosing an evidence-based and data-driven market solution? So this slide is based on work from the World Bank. The World Bank looked at several countries across the globe, and it's available online. They know the world had been pushing for an unbundled market. They looked at several territories that moved from a bundled market into an unbundled market. And by bundled, I mean regulated, as we have now, or to a deregulated system or unbundled market. And they tried to see how those countries fared over time. And then from that study, they tried to give thresholds that based on their research, what they had realized. And the graph summarizes this in the easiest way. The World Bank says before any country should start thinking about unbundling or unbundling, they should have a peak demand of about 1,000 megawatts. Jamaica, by comparison, has 632 as of 2021. So it's not even at that threshold yet, and that's a starting block. The other threshold that they had outlined is before a country definitively unbundles. So we'll put all the steps in place and we say, okay, this is the date that we're going to do this by. They should have a peak demand of above 3,000 megawatts. As you can see it in the graph here, Jamaica is below the starting block of 1,000. And our projected demand out to 2030 is probably about just under 800, based on the numbers that I've seen from the IRP2. So they concluded that the fixed costs associated with administration, which I spoke about in the slide previously, and the cost of regulation all make competition uneconomic in a small island network, such as island states. The World Bank found that for power systems to support a wholesale/unbundled market, competitive power market, it needed a minimum of at least 5 separate generation companies. I mean, proper separate 5 separate companies, and a load of about 3 gigawatts, 3,000 megawatts of demand, and 20 terawatts of annual demand per year. Now that 20 terawatts, as the minister said, compared to Jamaica. Jamaica has about 3 terawatt hours of sales per year. So we have quite a bit of room before we get to that 20 terawatts per hour. I should also point out to you that in our research, we looked at Israel, and Israel has about 67 terawatts of electricity sale per hour. And Israel has maintained a system which is similar to the single buyer system, meaning that they're an island state. They're not connected to any other territory around because of their particular reasons. And they have maintained a system whereby there's only one grid provider, and they have done it because they think it's the appropriate way to keep the grid secure and safe over the long term. The World Bank study also showed the results of duplication and overhead costs, stranded assets, plus transaction and market restructuring costs to be borne by the customers. And this one is a very interesting one, the stranded assets. Though, if we come back to this slide, when you think about breaking up a system, you're going to have a situation where individuals are going to want the most lucrative parts of that system. So they're going to look for where individuals are, they will pay their bills, their demand is high. And the DOMREP came across that when they went about unbundling their market in about either the late 1990s or early 2000s. And what the DOMREP experienced is when they started to unbundle, persons cherry picked. They went for the areas where they had clear revenue. And for Jamaica, that would be areas where you have your hotels, your businesses, because at that point they knew the revenue, they could pay for the entire fixed capital cost of the grid that's within that area. What ultimately happened in DOMREP when they unbundled is that the other transmission and distribution companies that came on, some of them were unfortunately saddled with areas which were not as lucrative as the other areas. And those areas were areas where you had persons with less ability or capital to be able to, they had fixed incomes. And what ultimately happened is they had rolling blackouts because they wouldn't invest what was required to keep the grid up to scratch. And the government had to come back into the market a couple of years after they started unbundling to the tune of, I think, $2 billion or more to either take back those companies or provide financial support for those companies. The very same thing also occurred in Germany. And in Germany, they started on a road where they were looking at having more renewables on the system. And so they pushed for those renewables to come on in a very big way. It did. And what ultimately happened is that you had power companies which were unable to get revenue to pay for the fixed capital which they had in the ground. And so those became what you call stranded assets. So someone had to take those assets off the books, and that fell to the government ultimately. Germany, thankfully, they had the wherewithal to be able to pay those companies or take those assets off their books. But in a situation where we have an island like Jamaica, we can have a stranded asset occurring, and those costs will have to be borne by someone at the end of the day. And ultimately, they may fall to the customers. With regards to the additional research which is there, and these are available online for anyone to read on their own, both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times looked at United States. They tried to understand the issues that several of us are aware of in the news, Texas being one of them, with their blackout a couple of years ago. And so they looked at deregulation / unbundling versus regulated utilities. And across the board, the headline here in the Wall Street Journal says deregulation aimed at lower home power bills for many. It didn't. The very same with the New York Times. Why are energy prices so high? Some experts blame deregulation. And it, at the heart of it, that is where the research is showing that when you unbundle, you get to a point where you're getting higher prices in the end. In Texas, the research showed that from 2004 to 2019, electricity in Texas from the utility, which were the bundled market utility, was 8% lower than the national average across the United States, while the rates from providers in the deregulated areas or the unbundled areas was about 13 to 14% higher. And that's not my words. These articles are online. You can read them there. The analysis found that those unbundled deregulated Texas resident customers pay about $28 billion, not million, $billion more for their power since 2004. So they went along this deregulation unbundled path and they ended up paying $28 billion more. I'm not sure.
Mr. Richardson, I'm so sorry to cut you, but just for the purpose of those colleagues who might not understand what you mean by bundled or unbundling, could you just explain, because I'm getting that query.
Okay, so with regards to, let me just go back a couple of slides. So here, a single buy model / bundle, that's what we mean by everything is owned by one, either the public utility or an investor. So the generation, the transmission lines, the substations, and the distribution lines are owned by one individual or one company. The unbundled model, on the other hand, is where this entire system is broken into its component parts. You have independent power companies, which are on profit motives. You have an independent transmission company, own profit motives. You have a broken out power market, own profit motive, and then you have the distribution side of it, own profit motive. So I hope that explains it. If it doesn't, I will just let me know and I'll try to do a better job.
No. I think you have done well in explaining it, but I'm just looking now, and please forgive me of the bluntness in terms of relevance, because I think we had already signed off in Jamaica that in relation to generation, that would be unbundled. So that is subject to competition. But in terms of distribution, transmission and distribution, there is no issue of unbundling there. So are you leading us to a different conclusion in that regard?
I'm not, sir. All I'm providing is the information that we have for the members of the JSC to look at this with both eyes open and make decisions which are appropriate for the country based on information given by the ministry.
But at the end, you're going to recommend something, right? Whether we maintain our position now, where we have a monopoly transmission and distribution arrangement, and we have a competitive generation arrangement. Are you going to be recommending anything different from that?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Let me get back to this. Right. So this slide is just to give a quick overview of what one researcher had come to. He said, what is clear from the research that there is no one regulatory or market structure best suited for enabling island states to achieve their power sector ambitions. A range of different reforms and initiatives are appropriate for different contexts. Is needed. History shows that the regulatory models advocated internationally will often not be appropriate for small island states. And that is what the ministry had come to its conclusion on. And we provided those outlines to the minister, the PS, and to cabinet as well, and sought their guidance. The other point I would like to raise to the members is another pressure on Jamaica's grid that we're seeing from the ministry side. It's not been spoken about openly, but there have been hints from the OUR and from the current investor on the grid about what is currently happening on Jamaica's grid. And that in the industry is called a utility debt spiral. So we have a situation where we have, say, a market like where we have in Jamaica. We have constant entrepreneurial attack. They're talking about declining technology costs, alternate business models that we could seek, and customers should seek alternative solutions or providers for their electricity. And so the traditional utility model gets on the siege, that they must deliver a particular reliability or cost effectiveness or environmental responsible power, and that the stakeholders must meet their fiduciary responsibility. And what you then have is that because you're having those issues and the concerns aren't being addressed, you have technology catching up. Where we are now, we can buy a utility in a box, and several people do that and put it on their rooftops. And then you get defection. You get people coming off the grid, and so that fixed costs get redistributed across those remaining on the grid. What that then does is cause upward price pressures. And then we get to a point where we get aging repairs or aging grid because there's not enough funds to deal with the repairs that's there. And you have the need for smart grid investments as well, which puts costs on the grid. And so that pushes further upward price pressures. And so the reallocation across the remaining customers, it spurs additional competition. Persons saying we can provide electricity cheaper, and you go back up to the entrepreneurial attack, and we go to the very same system. And Jamaica, it seems, is on that path right now because we're in a position where several of our large demand consumers, they have taken themselves off the grid. So they have their own utility in the box. And so the fixed cost for those remaining on the grid creep up, and they constantly creep up. And like I showed in the graph above, JPS's annual report is showing that there is a 5-year increase in the per kilowatt or unit rate for electricity. And we're seeing where that is not trending downwards because we're in this spiral. We're starting that spiral. We're seeing where customers with the most capability to pay for their electricity, they're thinking of having solar on a roof. So they're looking at that utility in a box solution, and they're taking that demand off the grid. So if you say for Jamaica, if 50%, for example, take that demand off the grid and 50% remain for whatever reason, and there's usually persons who have the least ability to change their income, so pensioners, so fixed income, that cost gets shifted to that 50%. The only way the price can go is up. Then there's the additional concern that the persons at 50% as taking their demand off the grid, they still remain connected to the grid. So they keep that connection, but they're not paying for the grid. So you have a problem which is growing for Jamaica. Our huge demanders are taking their demand off the grid. We have a structure which incentivizes it. But we're not looking at what then happens to the remaining customers who are unable to provide that utility in a box for themselves. So Jamaica may very well be starting or is a little bit down the road in that utility debt spiral. And the ministry has to find a way to see how we can start to curtail or ensure that the future grid that the minister spoke about is resilient and available to every Jamaican, not just the ones that have the funds to be able to afford it. So with regards to the context for the Jamaica electricity sector, how worried should we be? We have strong stakeholder angst for the electricity sector and the prices, and we can all agree. We have a decline in the customer base due to grid migration / defection. And we have a decline in electricity demand year on year. Those were demonstrated in the slides at the very beginning. Those are not my numbers. Those are not the ministry's numbers. That's the reality on the ground. Those fixed capital costs, which are steadily increasing with new capacity and increase in individual prosumers, those are the ones that are doing the utility in a box at their homes because they own that property. And they're coming onto the grid with their net billing or auxiliary connection licenses. We have that debt spiral being created, that fixed cost redistributed to the part of the population we can least afford it or on fixed income. And what that ultimately fosters is unfortunately, some go to the point where they just take electricity at no charge whatsoever. We have a situation where JPS's license is coming to an end in 2027. That's 4 years away. And within the time frame that we have, that is very, very short. And we have all of the above starting to converge faster than policy can keep up with. So we had some tough questions to respond to here at the ministry. Which existing grid assets would likely become stranded assets, which I spoke about earlier, and who would pay for these stranded costs? Because you have currently on the grid, like I outlined, 60% excess. Who is going to take on the costs for that? Would that be the investor? I'm pretty sure they wouldn't. So it would ultimately get passed on to the consumers. And I'll give an example of this. In Texas, they had a situation where they had a regulated market, bundled market. They went into an unbundled market. Under the bundled state, they had about 20 to 30%, don't quote me, in terms of excess power. So if demand went up to their maximum, they had an overage of about 20%. Persons looked at that and said that was waste. So let us get to a more efficient system. So they took the pathway and went to unbundled. In 2019, 2020, their excess on the grid was about 8% or just under 10%. What then happened is when they got to 2011, when demand started to peak and go above because of, say, cold weathers or very hot summers, they found themselves in situations where that maximum capacity had didn't have enough depth in it to be able to provide for that additional electricity demand which was coming on the grid. And because Texas is an island, meaning that they're not interconnected with the transmission system across the United States, they chose to be isolated. Some parts are connected, but not the entire of Texas. They had situations where I've lost my train of thought. They had situations where those assets were I'll come back to it. And another tough question for Jamaica is how should the Jamaica electricity market be designed with all of these factors converging? That is another big one for the ministry because we are seeing where we're incentivizing particular things which we're not sure how we're going to change that functionality going forward. So we can ensure that there's a grid that everybody can benefit from. So that, like the minister said, it's a strategic asset for everyone on the grid. And we have to get to a point where we allow that to continue being the case. How do we do this in a way where it maintains reliability, allows resilient infrastructure and equitable cost sharing? That equitable cost sharing is key because that is where we're talking about, is everyone paying their fair share and is everyone that's on the grid paying a cost that is affordable? How do we pay for updates in the grid for everyone's benefit in a distributed energy future? And that's the future I think everyone is looking at, where you're going to have rooftops on homes providing electricity to the grid. How do we get that to feed into the grid so it feeds everyone? Do we look at a situation where you have community solar projects? run by a utility, so to speak, so that we have that power on call, but we also have the backup that we require. So that if anyone is connected to the grid, they do have power. How do we get costs down and transition from fossil fuels and provide equity for everyone's sake? Our current grid seems to be designed looking in the rearview mirror, where it'll be facing a much different future when we get to taking climate change into consideration. Jamaica's likely to have much drier periods in the future. So our hydro is going to change a little bit. We're going to have hotter temperatures during the summer. So AC demand is going to increase, certainly. And we have to ensure that we have laid out the appropriate grid that can provide the electricity demands for the long term, looking at the future where we're seeing distributed energy coming on the grid, et cetera, et cetera. So with regards to the conclusions, the key takeaways: unbundling entails significant transactional costs, which should not be underestimated. It may be more expensive to have multiple providers than one single provider when it comes to island states. The ROFA is an embedded contractual, right? And removing it will likely have unknown implications to the GOJ and the customers. Jamaica's utility debt spiral has likely already begun and is leading to self-reinforcing upward price pressure on electricity prices. And I spoke about utility in a box. Grid parity for solar PV plus batteries or diesel or LNG is here. And it will lead to the eventual demise of the current electricity sector business model as we understand it, if we don't properly evolve the system based on the evidence and the experience of more capable persons. Our current energy sector goals: 50% delivered energy by diverted electricity from renewable energies by 2050, as we've all known. Increasing Jamaica's energy security, and by extension or economic security. Energy security by reducing vulnerability to price shocks due to fossil fuel volatility, and reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels. That's one of the key aims of getting to 50%. The sooner we can do that, we will get to a point where we have to import less fossil fuels. We've had a bit of a hiccup because of the pandemic, because of the war. We should have started rolling out more new renewables earlier, but we have 7 years to do it. And so the ministry has to get ourselves on an aggressive timeline to get to those points based on the understanding of the energy sector that we have at the point. And we want to get to a point where we have stable trending down with electricity prices. And we hope that with the plans that we have to go forward on, that will get us to that end state. And so, members, that's the end of my presentation. If there are any questions, I remain connected.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richardson. Members, I hope you found the presentation useful in relation to some of the tough decisions that we have to make. So at this point, I'm sure that there are members who would want to get further details, clarifications, and the floor is open.
Yes, Minister, I think my hand is up.
Yeah, Member Paulwell?
Yes.
Go right ahead, sir.
Yes. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Mr. Richardson, for the presentation. Well, Minister, you and I are at a later stage going to debate this issue of this delay in the work of the committee, because I haven't seen anything so far that has justified this 1 year gap in the work. In fact, what I'm hearing from Mr. Richardson is that there ought to be a greater sense of urgency. At the Senate Finance Committee meeting, I did commend the professionals in the ministry, because I really believe that they earnestly try to do the work that they are mandated to do. The unfortunate situation with Mr. Richardson is that he really came in late, so he probably would not have been aware of, say, for example, the very first presentation that was done to this committee by Mr. Vidal. And if you compare, you would see that the issues that are raised here would have been raised then. In fact, the issues that are raised here with respect have been issues that Jamaica has been grappling with for decades. For decades. What has happened with the Ukraine war is nothing new. In fact, it is far milder than the energy crisis we faced in 2008. The issues that we face in Jamaica remain, and it requires a tremendous sense of urgency to solve them. Now, I just wanted to ask Mr. Richardson, you mentioned that Jamaica now has a capacity of 1,000 megawatts. I think you used the year 2012, but if we could just bring it forward, would you say we're still in that ballpark, 1,000 odd megawatts that we have the capacity to generate? Mr. Richardson?
The install capacity across JPS and IPPs is 1,041 megawatts.
Very well. And you did say that our peak demand, that is the demand at its highest level, is around 660 thereabouts. Mr. Richardson? Oh.
600.
That's correct. I was muted. Sorry about that.
Right. And so we're about 40% over what is our peak demand in terms of our actual capacity.
60.
Forget my maths. You're saying 60? All right. I will accept your word. So we have a capacity to generate electricity at a level of 60% more than what we want at peak level. So if that is so, the minister's announcement at the commencement of the meeting that we are going for 371 megawatts of additional capacity. I'm just letting that sinking. We are at 1,000. We're going to add 371.
Remember, one is a replacement, member.
Yes, one is a replacement of 171.
Right.
Right. So we're putting on 200 more on this 1,000. So we're going to go to 1,200. And in Mr. Richardson's own word, we are not seeing any increase in demand. In fact, we're seeing demand being depressed because people are running away. So I think that is a fundamental question that the ministry will have to answer if the consumer isn't going to be burdened with additional price. And I don't know how the minister is going to resolve from that 371 because it has been announced people are anticipating that for 200 megawatts, they're going to be bidding, and JPS, of course, is looking to replace 171 megawatts. Now, there is another issue, Mr. Richardson, because you mentioned of the spiral, the death spiral of the JPS grid. It is not a new concept. We have been hearing about this for 30 years. In fact, when I was pushing to get renewables onto the grid, and in those days we were talking about 115 megawatts, I was being told by the OUR under its then leadership that if you did that, you're going to mash up the grid. You're going to see the grid crash in no time at all. Plus, you're going to result in JPSCO becoming a failed company. And that would have given us 12%. The government is now saying 50% of renewables will be done in the next 7 years. So probably you could also comment on that and whether or not the issue, the technical issue has been resolved. That is, that increasing the amount of renewable, that is generation that is not solid, that is generation that is not variable, we will still be able to maintain a viable grid at 50%. I will leave it at that for the time being. Again, I am saying, Minister, that we are not seeing new issues emerging out of what has happened in Ukraine. We are seeing a recurrence of the same old argument, and we run the risk of not affecting the score as was done in 2015, and at least an attempt was made to pass new legislation. Let us get on with this work now.
Before Mr. Richardson, so we're at 13 now members, 13% renewables. So you're talking about 37 to get to 50 by 2030. Mr. Richardson, go ahead.
So remember, the timing of how Jamaica starts to get itself on the pathway to having more renewables on the grid has to start at the soonest opportunity. That's based on the calculations done by the updated IRP. We need to, at this point, start putting more renewables and batteries onto the grid. Otherwise, we're not going to get to a state where we can have lower prices due to less fossil fuel being imported and balance the retirements that we're having coming up as well on the grid. So we're at the opportune time right now to be able to do the appropriate steps based on our understanding of the grid. And I think having renewables be the dominant procurement going forward should be the pathway that Jamaica goes on. And the IRP supports that position as well. So we're starting to put ourselves on that pathway. The 60% that you spoke about, the minister didn't procure that. That is on the grid, no. We have to put in place a pathway that either looks to get us where we want to be, that's 50%, largely solar, wind, and batteries. We have to start today. Every time we delay, we are causing our own issues as a country, and our economic security is at risk as well. So the earlier we start,
but I don't think you've answered the question though. So Mr. Richardson, you're saying that even though we have an oversupply today, and you're saying it's 60%, how are we going to absorb that? See that we're not going to be taking out all of that out of commission. How are we going to absorb that with the new renewables that will be coming online? Can you just resolve that in our minds? What are we going to do with the excess energy, electricity that we now have?
And so that's why I spoke about the stranded assets, sir. The ministry with the IRP team, we have to ensure we do this in a very structured way for the country. We have this excess capacity of 60%, and that's largely fossil fuel based. We need to, as they retire, push for renewable power coming on the grid. And so we have to ensure that timing is aligned with that retirement structure and when we get new fossil on the grid. And new renewables on the grid. And what we are sure is that we can't just build a renewable plant in 2 days or 6 months. There is a lead time to that. And we have to ensure we start with that lead time as we get to the points where these fossil generation capacities are coming to the end of their life.
And do you have a schedule of that so that we can look at it to see if it coincides with this attempt to bring on new capacity?
The
would you
IRP has that, sir. I am not from the IRP team, but they will be presenting that to yourselves and the entire Jamaica.
and would you say what is it the desired overcapacity that we need, the spare capacity that we need for a viable system? Clearly, it's not 60%.
I would leave that to the IRP team to speak to that.
Well, just one more question on this. You mentioned that a number of customers are leaving the grid and establishing their own facilities. And I don't have a difficulty with those people who are doing renewables. But it is my understanding, and I did ask the minister this question in Parliament, that a significant number of large customers are in fact utilizing natural gas to generate their own electricity. There is one supplier of natural gas so far into Jamaica. And it is my understanding that when that supplier and infrastructure was being created, the JPS customers are currently paying for that. But that with new customers being supplied by this supplier, that is those persons who are coming off the grid, that they would contribute ratably to all of that capital infrastructure that is in place. The ministry really has to answer the question. Are they doing so? Or is it still the burden of the Jamaican consumers through the JPS who have to be paying for this regasification plant that was established?
So remember the graph that I started on with the bathtub, the faucets. Know that LNG, which is the second faucet in the graph, that fixed capital cost it also includes the infrastructure that you spoke about. Those contracts were before the minister, but we will certainly be looking at them. That fixed cost is what pays for that electricity, because the gas doesn't just come to Jamaica. The infrastructure was built in to the cost of those generation plants. That was the structure I've seen that was permitted.
And who pays for that infrastructure?
That infrastructure is paid for, like what I'd said, everyone who remains connected on the grid.
All right, so you mean JPS customers? And all I'm saying to you,
Jamaican that's grid connected.
Yes, and all I'm saying to you, that was never, ever the intention. That it is only JPS customers would pay for that. That those other customers, those large customers who are getting natural gas from that same facility must also pay. And the ministry needs to insist and ensure that that is so. It couldn't be otherwise.
Member, I noted that from the discussion at the standing finance, and I'll have further discussions with you in terms of how you think we can proceed on that. But it's something that has to be addressed based on the comments that you made.
Minister, if I may. Minister.
Yeah, sure. Member Jackson, go ahead.
On this question about the payment, yes, I recall from way back when it has been raised about the contribution of the new customers, as Member Paul will mention off. The difficulty I'm having, Minister, is that we have these discussions and we are advised or informed what the policy position is, but nothing has happened or nothing is happening in respect of what was decided on. Because I'm surprised that I listened carefully when Member Paul will ask Mr. Richardson about that contribution by the new users of the LNG. I expect to be told how advanced the process is for that contribution. Now to hear that we're going to look at it 1 year after, more than 1 year after, is not a source of comfort. It would appear in a very vivid way that that there is no real intention to implement that policy position, only to acknowledge it as a policy, but not to act on it. And therefore, the comfort that consumers would have had, that they would be compensated for what they have paid for. Of course, it might be by rate reduction or which other mechanism that would have been chosen, but there would have been some benefit to them. And it's only the new users are getting the benefit of their sacrifice. That is the depth and profoundness of not doing anything to get that input. So at the very least, I would have expected Mr. Richardson to say, are you, Minister, based on that policy position that was taken from way back when, as of such and such a date, this is what's going to be done or what is proposed to be done, so that all of us on this committee, the country on a whole, can have at least the comfort in their mind that a decision that is in their favor is being acted on, not being contemplated at this stage. And that's a difficulty I'm having, Minister.
Member, I stated before, and as you remember, Paul had said earlier, there are new people that are here, including myself. There's also the fact that there's a private contractual arrangement in some cases in relation to the LNG supplier and the customer. So the bottom line is that I hear your concern, I hear your frustration, and my commitment is to get into it, because as of right now, we have very little. So I'm going to speak to Member Paul, who may be able to help me in relation to finding the information from previous.
So in that regard, I appreciate that disposition, Minister. Can you give an indicative timeline? Not a definitive one, but at least an indicative one.
I would say, Member, if I just to give you something with my speed, I would say let me come back to you within 60 to 90 days.
Before you go ahead, Member Paul or Member Jackson, I just wanted to go back to something that Member Paul asked of Mr. Richardson, and I'm not sure I got a clear answer. As I understand it, you outlined that we currently have capacity over 1,000 megawatt and seeking to add to that 200 or thereabouts, while at the same time, the demand and usage is going down or has gone, or we have excess. But that in build out of the renewables, which does take time, we will continue to utilize what we currently have. I'm not sure I'm understanding the need, therefore, even since we have the excess capacity already, the need to add to that, considering where we're intending to go and what is the current demand and the projected demand based on the historical data. I'm not sure I'm understanding it clearly as to the rationale for proceeding with the additional capacity.
So I'll ask Member I'll ask Mr. Richardson to respond to that. But just to say that I indicated before, remember that you're changing usage from fossil to renewables. So in the case of the 171, that would have been like for like before we changed the policy, which means that have been changing 171 fossil to like for like fossil. In this case now, the 171 will not be all fossil. It will be a mix with renewables, and therefore the renewables are critical to replace fossil. So, Mr. Richardson, you can speak more technically, but that in essence is it, Member Allen.
So before Mr. Richardson comes back on, so I can understand and appreciate what you're saying fully, Minister, of the amount that is there now and the replacement of fossil, we will still end up with an excess capacity of about where we are right now, based on what is being added. Is that the case?
Say that again for me, Member Allen.
So we are currently at 1,040, and we're seeking to add 171, and I'll just round that up to say 200. However, we are saying that that amount is replacing, that additional amount is replacing the fossil or some of the, so therefore we're going to end up with a net at about to where we are right now. Am I correct? Am I understanding correctly?
Member, let me do my best to clarify. The 171 is replacement, so it's already a part of this 1050. So that is fossil that needs to be replaced by renewables.
Mm-hmm.
There are other fossil plants that are getting to their end of life that we would want renewables to replace those as those retirement points come up. And so the aim is to get those fossil plants out of the system based on their retirement schedule. And in order to get both aligned supply of these renewables, we have to start the procurement now. So the numbers, it's also the renewable procurement are going to be done in tranches. So it's not, say, bam on the ground, 200 megawatts. They're probably going to do it in chunks that are appropriate based on what IRP has outlined. And so the aim is to get ourselves not at a number that grows the installed capacity, but basically maintains the status quo, but shifts our status quo from fossil to renewables. That is the aim.
Mr. Richardson, I appreciate the deliberate explanation. And I guess when you're not so familiar, and I don't deal with this on an everyday basis, I'm simply looking at the 1 + 1 = what, and to understand and appreciate the need for the additional investment in an area where just to appreciate and the impact that will have on users like myself. So I ultimately wanted to understand, and if you're saying that I understand it's a phase basis. I understand that it won't be immediate because we plan to go in a certain direction. I want to better understand and appreciate the need to go in a certain direction and the investment to be made and what impact of that investment may have on the Jamaican consumer. So I appreciate the deliberate explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Allen. All right, so Member Paulwell, you are.
No, yes, no, if there are no other issues on this point, Minister, I would like to understand now, where do we go from here?
So, member, as I indicated before, we have done what we need to do. We're satisfied. We have gone to cabinet, and basically we will get on now with the review of the act in an expeditious manner. There may be other considerations that the members may have as we go through the act, but we are clear at the ministry, and we have done our duty in terms of making sure that we have consulted the cabinet and gotten their sign off. So it's all, I don't want to say it's a green light, but it's a go in terms of moving, as we said, to the urgency of the situation.
And that green light is to give JPSCO 171 megawatts of capacity to replace 171 megawatts of capacity, and 200 megawatts of renewables to be subject to full procurement rules.
Spot on, member. And of course, as we go through the matrix, if there's anything else that we need to discuss, we will do so at that time and move to the point of where we can come to a close of the review and proceed and move forward.
Right. When will we get back to the matrix, Minister?
we sent out something based on the previous matrix and the new matrix, and basically we can move forward on that for the continue the review for the next meeting, and I don't see why we can't have regular meetings now to try and conclude this in the shortest possible time.
When is our next date, proposed date for the next meeting?
I think the secretary can tell us what the dates are available, but between this and the Cyber Act, member, I'm definitive on getting the both of them concluded in the shortest possible time, as both of them are critical to different areas of the country, especially at a time like this.
You want to propose this?
I want to see what are the dates.
Chairman, the dates are April 13 and 20th, 10 a.m. Those are Thursdays. Those are what are now available.
What dates are those? Say again?
April 13 and April 20th, 10 a.m.
I think we should take the both of them. When is my cyber? When is my next cyber? You have that, you have this schedule for Parliament?
I will check and tell you, Chairman, but it's close to those dates as well. Some of them are close.
If these two dates are available, I think based on what has been discussed here and the fact that we're very clear in terms of to continue the review, that we can do them if the members are amenable. I would propose to take those two dates and try and move as quickly as possible. What's your thoughts, Member Paul? And
I'm sorry, did you say the 13th?
Yes,
13th.
the 13th and the 20th.
Oh, 22nd on Monday.
13th and 20th. I have cyber on the 22nd of March. So 13th is the next, and 20th are two available dates for Parliament, for the parliamentary schedule.
Yes, I'm good for those.
Is there any? Well, the bottom line is that if there's no objection, we can take those dates, and unfortunately, if there's anybody that is unable to make it, we will obviously accept their apology. But I definitely think we should move with alacrity in relation to this. And I'm going to do some legwork on the matter that Member Paul and Member Jackson raised to see if I can at least come back to you with something preliminary in relation to what we have found in relation to the LNG matter. All right, so can I propose the 13th and the 20th, please? And silence is consent. If there's anybody who unfortunately who can't make it, I would ask them to just notify us. And of course, we can move on in relation to that.
And Chairman, you had asked about cyber crimes. So you have dates for the 12th of April and the 19th for cyber crimes as well. Yes.
Perfect. So that is that means there's no conflict to that. I make myself available. That's fine. Thank you so much for that. Respectfully.
Chair, I'm sorry. Could you just confirm the time?
10 o'clock both days, 13th and 20th,
right.
10 a.m. Just in time for you to go to court.
That's exactly where I'll be on the 13th, Chair. But I hope to join you.
You can join us. You can join us from the car park while you're waiting on them to call up your case. We need you, remember, Roland Gamble. So I'm sure that you'll work some magic.
I don't expect the matter to be very long, Chair. I will join you. I just will be a little late.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, you know, that Thursday is for some of us constituency day. You know, we have been sacrificing much of it for these meetings.
Oh, Member Jackson, I know that based on your situation, that won't detain you, I'm sure. that you will get
Because I
to
take
jobs
nothing for granted
to
why I
instead
can't
of the morning and then go till
give
night
them the whole
to make
day.
up back the time.
They have earned it.
That's why it's good to be. That's why it's good to be in the Senate, eh?
Well, I don't know about
All right, Member Jackson. I'm sure you'll do. This is of utmost importance. So I'm sure you'll
I appreciate that.
All right. So can I ask for my members in relation to the confirmation of the minutes for the February 17th and July 6th meeting for a confirmation, and then of course, if there's any matters arising that would want to be raised on that, so we can just for good order put that.
I could move for the February meeting, but I would really have to look over the July meeting.
Okay. So you can move for the February 17th meeting, Member Paulwell?
Yes.
All right, seconded.
I can second that, Chair.
Member Golden Campbell, thank you very much. And I think for the July 6th meeting, could I get
Could you give us a little bit more time to peruse those?
Sure. You want to do it at the next meeting then?
Yes.
All right. Is Member Hilton on?
I'm sorry, he did send apologies. I'm so sorry.
All right. His SEC matter that he raised, which is minuted in relation to his concern in relation to the act. We are in touch with the SEC, so by the next meeting we'll have something on that, because that's a fundamental issue that he raised in relation to the current act.
Well.
All right. So members, again, I want to thank the ministry team for the hard work, and Member Richardson for the presentation, which I think broke it down into layman's terms for many of us. And of course, the questions that were asked were relevant questions by the members. I can say definitively that I'm much more comfortable, and despite the fact that Member Paulwell doesn't feel that the delay was necessary, I for sure as minister am much more comfortable based on the fact that I've done what I think needed to be done. And the most important thing is that we'll move to get this matter to conclusion in terms of the review member, as you have requested, and we agree that time is not on our side, especially with the clock ticking down to 2030. So thanks again, and again for your patience and understanding. We can agree to disagree in some cases, but as usual, we do so in a cordial way. And of course, I thank my members, the entire membership, for their understanding, and we look forward to moving straight into the matrix, which we will. I'll just make sure that what was sent out today is the final, if not send out the final, so that we can now take it from there and continue with the review. Thank you very much. Keep safe, and see you on the 13th of April at 10 a.m. and then the 20th of April. And I don't see why we can't set additional dates then to be able to conclude, as I think that this has taken us a far way. Thank you very much, and see you on the 13th. Keep safe, and look forward
Same to you.
Look forward to seeing my colleagues in Parliament tomorrow to listen to my Prime Minister's budget presentation. I know Member Paulwell and Member Fitzjackson will be there on time.
We will be there, but we're disappointed that you weren't there yesterday.
You know what? I had a very important matter, but I'll convey my apologies in person tomorrow.
Your absence was pronounced.
I know it made things go smoother without me there, eh? All right. Thanks. All the best, guys. Keep safe.
Hello.
Every Jamaican has the right to know what is happening in Parliament, to know when new laws are being passed, and to give their opinions on legislation before either house.
Every Jamaican has the right to see their representatives in action, making laws, holding the executive to account, representing the people, working for the benefit of all Jamaicans.
It is your right to observe first-hand meetings of the Senate, meetings of the House of Representatives, and the meetings of parliamentary committees. You may also take a tour of your parliament.
To find out more about the Houses of Parliament, please call 876-922-0200, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, or visit our website at www.japarliament.gov.jm.
Here is a special parenting message brought to you by the National Family Planning Board, 5 Sylvan Avenue, Kingston 5. The way we treat our children directly impacts what they believe about themselves. That was a special parenting message brought to you by the National Family Planning Board, 5 Sylvan Avenue, Kingston 5.
Violence against women and girls is a human problem, not just a woman's problem. It's a problem for men too. Gender violence takes many forms, including sexual assault, domestic violence, relationship abuse, sexual harassment, and sexual abuse of children. The magnitude of ongoing violence against women and children in our country is cause for alarm. We can end the violence. It requires all of us to end the violence. I call on all our men and women in Jamaica to take a stand. And men, especially, must get involved in this movement to create a better world for their daughters, their mothers, their sisters, their aunts, their uncles, their fathers, their sons, and for themselves. Let's protect and reassure. Let's unite to end gender violence.
Your government is working for you. On the East Coast, there's the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project. The highway, which began in January 2017, is now slated to end in March 2025. Another segment under the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project is the Maypen to Williams Field, which is approximately 81% complete. Next stop, the Morant Bay Urban Center. Preparation and demolition exercises began in July 2022 at the Goodyear factory in the parish where the center is being constructed. Construction phase has already started. Third stop, over in Portmore. Plans are afoot to make the Sunshine City the 15th parish. With the parish status comes the Portmore Resilience Park, which ground will be broken by year-end 2022. For in the west, we have the Montego Bay Perimeter Road, starting from Iron Shore to Bogue, from Montego Bay down to Montpelier. More updates to come as we reignite our nation for greatness.
The proceeding was brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
Coming in April.
Jamaica, we are now facing severe drought conditions. Did you know that 12 of 13 parishes received below normal rainfall? 11 parishes experienced meteorological drought conditions in the December-January bi-monthly period. Below normal to near normal rainfall is in the forecast for the island for February to April. Near normal to above normal temperatures are expected for the February to April period. These conditions are affecting the National Water Commission's operations, as more than 260 of the enterprise's 450 systems are supplied by rivers and springs, and these are extremely vulnerable to drought conditions. The island-wide drought is severely impacting the storage levels at the Mona Reservoir and the Hermitage Dam. Other systems in other parishes are also being impacted. Despite the challenges, the NWC is committed to continue our service to you through the implementation of our drought resilience strategy. These include regulating the supply in the corporate area and in all other areas based on the nature of the system and the level of impact as part of a strategic management mechanism to ensure that the existing supply can last over a sustained period to benefit you, our valued customers. We are trucking water to the worst affected areas using the recently procured water trucks and other trucking resources. We are continuing the implementation of the non-revenue water reduction program in Portmore St. Catherine, following its successful implementation in Kingston and St. Andrew. This program targets reducing water theft, leaks, and other losses along the network so that more water is available for legitimate domestic, commercial, and firefighting purposes. Additionally, we continue to commission several system improvements in all parishes.
We get it out in our home, the kitchen, the bathroom. I feel good about it. I appreciate it very well.
These improvements include pipeline extensions, wells, and tanks that are all helping to cushion the effects of the ongoing drought conditions brought on by global climate change and other factors. As part of the medium-term strategy, there has been the upgrade of the Spanish Town to Blake Road transmission main that will improve the supply to several communities along Spanish Town Road, Marcus Garvey Drive, sections of Central Kingston, and downtown Kingston. We are also looking ahead. A major public-private partnership agreement was recently signed to harness 15 million gallons of water per day from the Rio Cobre in St. Catherine to help augment the supply in Spanish Town, Portmore, and Kingston and St. Andrew. Drought has become an unfortunate reality for several countries across the world. Through an effective drought management strategy, we will endure. Go to our website, nwcjamaica.com, to see how you can help play your part by being water smart. The NWC, serving you in so many ways.
Jamaica, home of the resilient, passionate, and hardworking. A people and a nation who have achieved and defied all odds, working to keep their economy growing, their country thriving, from investments made in innovative opportunities and exports demanded globally. We have a vision, now within our grasp, where Jamaica becomes the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. We will not let go of this vision. We will grow. We will overcome these challenging times and look to the future with hope and positivity. These are special times. The world as we know it has changed, but home will always be in our hearts. And in Jamaica, you can always find a home. Think you know Jamaica? Look again. You will be surprised.
But I really wish somebody would have said this about me though, you know. But me never give them cause. Maybe me never silent enough. But a nice little Jamaican proverb that them would say about people. Silent river run deep. In other words, never underestimate a person who is quiet. So you see like a nice, quiet, seemingly shy girl, a guy might say, silent river run deep. And the same thing will be true for a guy too, who they seem quiet, but then you never know what is underneath all that. Silent river run deep for true.
twists, turns, ins and outs. From the four corners of the earth, PBCJ presents Globe-Trotting Yardie with Carol Francis.
There are numerous ways of traveling across the city of Delhi.
Tantalizing, breathtaking and revealing, bringing you the wonders of travel from across the world. That's Globe-Trotting Yardie right here on PBCJ, the People's Station.
Our planet Earth experiences an ever-changing climatic cycle, which includes rising temperatures, changes in rainfall patterns, and an increase in direct heat from the sun. This has been adversely affecting our agricultural sector, which has cost us an estimated $14.4 billion in damages and losses due to major climatic events between 1994 and 2010. As a result of climate change, we have seen the development of extreme weather events such as hurricanes, floods, landslides, water stagnation, and saltwater intrusion. These have severely impacted our agricultural systems, which includes our farmlands, livestock, and by extension, our livelihood and value chains. One affected farmer shared her experience of the struggles she faced on a day-to-day basis on her small-scale farm. Miss Simpson, who has been a part of the Bull Savannah Benevolent Society in St. Elizabeth for over 4 years, says extreme temperatures has severely affected farming.
From time to time, as you know, from time to time, the heat is too much for certain plants. So we would leave the plant like this morning, and by the time we get back in the afternoon, most of the plants have died.
While admitting that the community does not practice rain harvesting, she notes that the government through RADA has been providing technical support. However, she adds that the farmers try to help themselves in mitigating the impacts of climate change, particularly during periods of drought, by employing methods such as drip irrigation.
That's what most of us do. So we would normally have to purchase our water, which is very costly, and we would actually use that for our farming. We are affected mostly by drought within the December period, comes straight down to May mostly. Sometimes it even runs straight down to August. But even say within climate change, our real problem still is the water. That is really our main problem. Lack of knowledge is really one of our barriers where climate change is concerned. We would love to increase knowledge in our farmers where climate change is concerned. We would actually, if we have stakeholders who we actually can invite to our meetings, or we set up a meeting date with them where they can actually teach our farmers or inform our farmers on whatever steps to take whenever we come up on climate changes, or how to get through where climate changes is concerned with our farming.
Ms. Simpson explains that flooding affects their crops.
Whenever we have flooding, it's a possibility because some farms, the floodwater will rush through it. Whenever we have hurricane, I think it comes with some acidic rain, so you know that everything actually burn off from the field. So we would lost everything during that time. So to be honest, during that time, we have to be careful. If we planning on planting anything, we would, plant and try to reap before that time. But again, we still have to try and have things during that time as well, because if there's nothing,